My name is Tyson. I'm the cotton specialist with the University of Tennessee. In this presentation, I'm going to share some of the experiences that we've had trying to integrate cover crops into cotton production. There's a lot of great things about cover crops, but unfortunately cover crops do bring some challenges for us, especially around establishment of the cotton crop. So usually late April, early May. I'm going to spend the next couple of slides covering some of those issues that we've observed, and then we'll dive into some of the research that we've conducted to help minimize the risks associated with some of these issues. First of all, the higher the quantity of biomass that you generate with a cover crop, you're going to get typically more benefits. You're going to see greater levels of weed suppression. When you have higher levels of biomass, you're obviously going to sequester more carbon. You're going to have more residue on the soil surface, reductions in erosion, increases in water holding capacity and infiltration rates. All of those things are great, but we've got to be able to process the biomass with the planter. We've got to be able to slice that residue and properly place seed within the soil and get optimal seed to soil contact. Unfortunately, when we get into very high levels of biomass, a lot of our planter units are not designed or in some situations not capable of processing that level of biomass. This is actually a field that has been planted and the stand failed, and that was because the planter simply could not penetrate the residue and properly place those seed within the soil. Instead of getting that optimal seed to soil contact, the seed were basically just dribbled out on the soil surface. So processing this biomass with our planter can be a real challenge. The next challenge we have is allelopathy. So when we talk about weed suppression from a cover crop, we generally think about the physical barrier that's created with that biomass, but there are also some chemical compounds that those cover crops, when they break down, they release. And those compounds can suppress weeds. They do a very good job on small seeded weeds like Palmer hammerhead, but they can have some impacts on larger seeded species, including our cash crops. And so, when we have green material present, dead or decaying material present, a lot of times that's when we'll see that flush of allelopathy. And we have seen in some situations some quite a bit of injury associated with those allelopathic chemicals in our emerging cotton. And you can see some of that here. We've got deep, dark red stems. We've got cotyledons that have already shed. The plants look very, very stressed. And again, a lot of this is because of the brassicas that were present and decaying right there adjacent to the road. One of the more challenging parts, even if you were able to get a good solid kill early enough, you had the appropriate level of biomass your planter can process, and you can get adequate seed to soil contact. Cover crops in and of themselves are going to increase the moisture content of that soil after a rainfall. So basically that cover crop and the soil that the cover crop is planted in is going to function a lot like a sponge. That's a tremendous benefit to us when we get into July and August. But when we're in May, and especially in the Mays that we've become very familiar with as of late, where we get excessive rainfall events, basically you're holding a tremendous amount of water right there around the young seedling, and that can cause some real issues from a germination and emergence standpoint. Beyond that, we also see cover crop ground is cooler, and so you're not going to be able to warm up as quickly as you would if the residue was not present. This is a picture I took up in Gibson County, and you can pretty clearly see where this was a little bit of a wash. They had worked it up a little bit, and you can see every seed was properly placed, had very good seed to soil contact, and those seedlings jumped out of the ground. But as soon as you get into the residue, into the cover crop residue, you'll notice it's very, very difficult to see those seedlings. They did not emerge. That seed rotted in those cooler and wetter conditions. So this is one of the most challenging parts of integrating cover crops into cotton production, just due to cotton's inability to tolerate saturated and cool soil conditions at planting. And again, just to kind of provide a little bit more information on the picture that I included, when we started digging up those seed, we can clearly see that those seed rotted in that, again, cooler and wetter conditions of the cover crop. The other thing I want to point out, and this has been a big issue in some areas in 2022, is a Greenbridge. And I got some calls earlier this year about some discoloration of some cotton plants. Generally speaking, the stand looked poor, and on further evaluation, immediately recognized three-cornered alfalfa hopper damage. Those three-cornered alfalfa hoppers are not something we typically talk about in cotton. They will occasionally appear in conventional or no-till ground, but usually they're impacting a percentage of 1%. I mean, very, 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 very low. When you have a cover crop, particularly a cover crop with legumes in the mix, and you fail to kill it early. So let's say we applied our burn down application, and let's say the clover made it through, which that occasionally can happen, or the vetch or some other legume makes it through. Those legumes can harbor these three-cornered alfalfa hoppers. After that cotton emerges and that those legumes ultimately decide to go ahead and die, those three-cornered alfalfa hoppers will move right off of that legume and right onto the cotton and create some really, really, really poor stands. In this field, had about 35,000 plants up to a very good stand, but unfortunately the legume present, clover in this situation, did not completely die, and as it began to finally turn, those three-cornered alfalfa hoppers moved over and did some very, very severe damage. You can see the three-cornered alfalfa hoppers here. There's actually 3 on this seedling. Some of the damage was below the cotyledonary node. Some of it was above the cotyledonary node. What we'll typically see after that plant gets some size to it, if there are three-cornered alfalfa hoppers out there, they'll move to the branches or to the petioles. But in this situation, there was enough damage that was done that a replant was warranted. Almost every plant within a row in some of the worst areas had been impacted. And although they appear to be alive at the moment, when those nutrient demands and water demands increase in the plant, the damage to the vascular tissue is oftentimes significant enough that the plant will just die. And when I get the call on, my stand is moving backward, particularly in a cover crop scenario, a lot of times three-cornered alfalfa hoppers may be to blame. And you can see the old carcasses of these damaged plants if you take a close look when you're walking the field. The first thing that you'll typically note, though, will be that discoloration of that upper plant material. It'll look like it's a very, very drought-stressed plant. You'll start to see some red pigments, that anthocyanin increase, and eliminating the Greenbridge is going to be one way, as well as incorporating some type of an insecticide in the mix to eliminate these pests. Those are going to be very, very important when we try to integrate cover crops into cotton production. There's a long list of how-tos that the Natural Resources Conservation Service provides, and most of these are very, very good recommendations. We definitely want to we've had a lot of experience with cover crops over the past several years, and I want to point out, a lot of the practices that we're adopting have been thoroughly vetted further south. Those practices work well in more southern latitudes, because they have a longer growing season. We can make a lot of these practices work, but there is an inherent risk associated with it. Cotton isn't typically grown north of Tennessee. The field that I've pictured down here at the bottom of the slide, this is actually on the Tennessee-Kentucky line. I think it's important to point out that we do fall on the northern edge of the belt, and so we don't have the luxury of additional heat units that many to the south of us do. When we start messing with the beginning of the season, when we start, we incorporate cover crops, we have potentially higher moisture contents, cooler temperatures, we are limiting our growing season, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can when we integrate a cover crop to minimize that potential delay in maturity based on our latitude. I think it's also wise to contemplate, why do we typically see stands fail in Tennessee? Generally speaking, it's going to be a combination of several, but number one, cold stress. That blackberry winter, right when that seedling's trying to emerge, that's going to be very, very stressful in almost every season. Most of the time, it's too wet. We'll have some excessive rainfalls that can slicken off those soils and create saturated soil conditions. We also see thrips as a stressor, and we also have herbicide injury. These are the things that typically would cause a stand to fail in Tennessee. How do we typically overcome those stressors? Well, there are some approaches. Number one, occasionally people will try to hill drop seed to get more lifting power. We definitely protect from thrips, and there's obviously some new proteins available now and some germplasms where we can incorporate an inherent protein to provide some tolerance to thrips. We've got to make sure that we're properly applying those pre-emerges at the correct rate to limit the amount of stress from that herbicide. And the last one is to wait for the seed bed to warm. Now, there are some other methods in low-lying, relatively flat areas. We do see some use beds, and I'm not advocating for a bed in every acre in Tennessee, but I do think it's important to keep in mind there was a reason that a lot of producers and a lot of producers now used to and now use beds in the Delta regions. That allows that seedling to have a little bit less water in that soil profile, a little more air. It allows that bed to warm up a little bit quicker, and those things can be very, very valuable to that developing cotton seedling, again, compared to what we're doing if we're planting into a flat ground cover crop, which is basically going to hold moisture and remain cooler for this planting period. So I've spent a lot of time talking about some of the challenges. Let's spend a little time talking about the benefits. Number one, a reduction in erosion, and for us, that is tremendous. Two, we see a reduction in nutrient leaching. We see increase in nutrient cycling. So that cover crop is going to pull nutrients from lower in the subsoil and deposit those back on the soil surface and increase that cycle there within the system, limiting the amount of nutrients that are leaving the field. We see weed suppression, and weed suppression has been one of the bigger factors, one of the real reasons for increase in the use of cover crops. We see an increase in water holding capacity and infiltration rates, and I would argue this is extremely important for us in the dryland environment, but it can also be very important for us in irrigation. And most of the time in our area, we're putting on about 3/10 of an inch of water. Having a cover crop out there, you may be able to increase that rate considerably because of the increase in infiltration rate and increase in water holding capacity. That could prevent you from having to run that pivot, almost continuously. Maybe you can put on a 1/2 inch and get a few more days in between each of those irrigation events. Last thing I'll mention is buffered soil temperatures. And so let's say we do get a cold snap in mid-May. If that cover crop soil has warmed up, that cover crop acts as a blanket and it'll hold temperature a little bit better through some of these temperature fluctuations we see. That also applies in the middle of the summer when soil temps are just really, really high. especially if we're in dry, hot July, the cover crop soil is going to be a little bit cooler, and that's going to help that plant potentially increase water uptake and nutrient uptake. I've mentioned a lot of the challenges, and I'm not going to go back through those. I do want to share a couple of the benefits, some data from the benefits that we've captured. This is a side slope in Milan. This is data we collected several years ago. We basically just had bin run wheat compared to some fallow ground. And I've got some pictures here of that fallow planted versus the wheat residue. You can see we don't have a tremendous amount of residue. But even with that little amount of residue, when we measured volumetric water content with some EC5, some moisture sensors, we saw that wheat cover crop increase volumetric water content by almost 8 to 10%. And this is volumetric water content. This is not plant available water. There's a big difference there. Plant available water increases here are probably 20 to 30%. Some people have talked about cover crops as a poor man's irrigation. This is the data that would prove it. If you're in that fallow scenario, that water is running over that profile. It's not infiltrating in. When you have that wheat cover crop, that water is infiltrating in and being retained in a plant available manner, and that's where we can see some significant yield increases from a cover crop. Challenges, again, addressing residue at planting. This is going to be a big one. Cooler temperatures at planting, allelopathy and the potential residue impacts on the cash crop. We see early season nutrient immobilization, so that breaking down of the cover crop can tie up some nutrients. We see those altered insect populations through corn and alfalfa hopper is one that is a major concern. And then altered soil moisture at planting, which most of the time is going to be excessive moisture when we're looking at earlier termination. So from a research standpoint, there are a large number of research questions, and we've been trying to tackle these for the past 5 years. The first is when to terminate. Generally, we think 3 weeks prior to planting. What about that at planting? And that's based on our data that I'll share, much riskier. How do you terminate? Do we need a herbicide? Can we just use a roller? Not to give out all the secrets here right at the beginning, but in Tennessee, we've got to have that herbicide. The roller's not providing an adequate kill. How do you plant? How do you set up that planter? In my opinion, we need some aggressive row cleaners. I like to have a lead coulter kind of slice that residue. And then, lots of options on closing systems. From a species standpoint, we also have a little data on what we should include versus what we shouldn't. What's going to generate the highest level of weed suppression versus what's going to be adverse or create some real stress for that developing cotton crop. So NRCS provided some funding to us early on, and we were able to tackle several of these questions. From a when to terminate standpoint, we looked at a strip kill where we basically killed out the residue right above the row, and we left the residue within the row middle, left the cover crop to continue to grow up until planting. We compared that to a 6 weeks prior to plant broadcast kill, a 4 week prior to plant broadcast kill, and then an at planting kill. From a how to terminate standpoint, we looked at the herbicide, plus the roller, and then we looked at just the roller. We applied these, we conducted these trials on producer farms and on the research and education centers. This is just one image of that earlier burn down application. Here's another where we actually use the producer equipment to complete that. This is applying that strip kill treatment. And here's a location a little bit to our south in Chester County where we're using some of the equipment we have here at the experiment station to make these applications. The hand applied is actually going to be that strip kill versus the broadcast kill that's going to be made by that mud master. I want to spend just a little time talking about some of the results, and This is work that Savannah Denton completed for her dissertation, and we'll be publishing it shortly. But I want to point out some key findings from this research. First off, let's look at cotton emergence, and this is in plants per acre. When we looked at the at-plant termination, we saw a significant reduction in the number of plants emerged. That is significant and it should be noted. We also saw a reduction in emergence when we looked at just the roller crimper. That roller crimper was not able to provide an adequate kill, and we had additional green residue present at planting. Because of that, we saw a reduction in stand. Additionally, when we looked at early season development from a termination method standpoint, chemical, mechanical, or chemical plus mechanical, we didn't see any differences, significant differences in early season development, but we did note a significant delay in maturity when we looked at the at planting termination. So it didn't matter if we were applying 6 weeks prior to plant broadcast or in a strip. We did see that significant delay in maturity, though, when we delayed that termination until planting. Thrips injury, we didn't see significant differences from a termination timing standpoint. We did see some trends from a three-cornered alfalfa hopper injury. The 6-week broadcast treatment resulted in fewer plants damaged. We saw higher levels of damage when we had green residue remaining in the system longer, especially when we got up there to the at planting termination timing. And we did see, as we might expect, if we delayed that termination later in the year, we typically saw more weed suppression. The more biomass we can generate, the more weed suppression we're going to have. Unfortunately, some of that increases in weed suppression also showed up again on an emergence standpoint and a delayed maturity standpoint on our cotton. When we started looking in season at the impacts, a lot of these stuck with us through the growing season. And I want to focus on a couple of columns here. First off, I want to look at first fruiting branch. We saw a significant increase in first fruiting branch. Basically, that first fruiting branch moved up the plant when we delayed that termination to planting. And basically, what's happening there is the plant is seeing that cover crop as a competitor, as a weed, and it's trying to add more monopodial branches to shade out that cover crop and delaying that maturity on up the plant. That actually showed up as we moved into note above crack bowl. It wasn't significant with note above crack bowl, but it was significant when we looked at percentage of open bowls. We saw a reduction of about 10 to 13% in the number of or percent of open bowls when we had that delayed termination. When we waited to delay that cover crop until planting, we saw fewer bowls opened at the time where 40% were typically open in some of those earlier termination windows. The last thing I want to point out from a results standpoint is the effect of cover crop termination on lint yield. Two things to note here. First off, no significant differences in either the termination timing or termination method. All of this data, again, has been pooled across about 8 or 9 site years. So we're looking at the accumulation of a lot of data. No significant differences. Now, there are some numerical trends that we should not be interpreting. The point I want to make here is we've identified where the potential delay in maturity is occurring, why it's occurring. A lot of times we have the falls that allow us to compensate, even correct some of these issues that we're seeing in field. That doesn't mean that everyone should delay and terminate at planting. In my opinion, I would go with a 6-week prior to plant termination to minimize my risks. If we get in a short season environment, which we didn't really capture in this data set, if we have a 2014 where we're running out of heat units late in the year, that's when I would expect to see a real yield penalty associated with delaying that cover crop termination until planting. In a normal year, you may be able to see compensation and not suffer some of the consequences of having that at planning termination date. But in my mind, the best recommendation, the best way to minimize risk will be to go ahead and move that termination earlier in the year, prevent the potential risk of a delay in maturity and ultimately a reduction in yield. One other thing I want to mention, when you're trying to establish cotton into a cover crop, you need to properly select your variety. This is a slightly dated list of seed size, but I want to point out our larger seeded varieties are going to have more vigor, generally speaking, than our smaller seeded varieties. And if I'm planting into a cover crop, I want to, number one, increase my seeding rate, but number two, select a variety that is typically larger seeded. And that's going to have a better chance of dealing with some of these stressors that we're including adding to the system early on, and allow the chances for a successful plant to increase. Couple of take homes. First off, the benefits of cover crops, in my opinion, justify the risks, but proper integration techniques are going to be key. You need to be checking the planter continuously when you're planting in cover crops. There's a chance that you may not be able to plant very early in the morning when the cover crop is wet with dew, or very late in the evening. You've got to terminate early enough to eliminate the Greenbridge and provide an opportunity for those allelopathic chemicals to break down. You need to expect the delay in maturity of that cotton crop and manage accordingly. And last, I want to say, start small. This isn't going to be something you need to put on every acre in year one. You need to start with a small portion of a farm, and you need to terminate early. And if you start there, that'll allow you to work through some of the small bumps and bruises and potentially scale up. Maybe you start looking at some of these later terminations to try to capture a few more benefits with the experiences you've already gained when you started small. Thank you for watching this virtual presentation. I've included my contact information here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.